Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udhirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Ruttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Srinvata Swakatha Krishna Punyasravana Kirtanaha Hridayantastu Yabhadrani Vidunoti Suhrutsatam. Hare Krishna. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 8, Verse 2. In Chapter 3, Canto 3, Chapter 8, Verse 2. Soham rinangshulla sukhaya dukkham mahadgatanam viramaya tasya pravartaye bhagavatam puranam yadaha sakshat bhagavan rishibhya. Synonyms: Saha, that, Aham, I, Drinam, of the human being, Kshulla, very little, Sukhaya, for happiness, Dukkam, distress, Mahat, great, Gatanam, entered into, Viramaya, for mitigation, Tasya, his, Pravartaye, in beginning, Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, Puranam, Vedic supplement, Yet, which, Aha, said, Sakshat, directly, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Rishibhya, unto the sages. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charan Aravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Let me now begin speaking on the Bhagavata Purana, which was directly spoken to the great sages by the personality of Godhead, for the benefit of those who are entangled in extreme miseries for the sake of very little pleasure. Purport. The sage Maitreya proposed to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam because it was especially compiled and traditionally comes down in the disciplic succession for the solution of all the problems of human society. Only one who is fortunate can have the opportunity to hear Srimad Bhagavatam in the association of pure devotees of the Lord. Under the spell of material energy, the living entities are entrapped in the bondage of many difficulties simply for the sake of a little bit of material happiness. They engage in fruitive activities, not knowing the implications, under the false impression that the body is the self. The living entities foolishly relate to so many false attachments. They think that they can engage with materialistic paraphernalia forever. This gross misconception of life is so strong that a person suffers continually, life after life, under the external energy of the Lord. If one comes in contact with the book Bhagavatam, as well with the devotee Bhagavata, who knows what Bhagavatam is, then such a fortunate man gets out of the material entanglement. Therefore, Sri Maitreya Muni, out of compassion for the suffering man in the world, proposes to speak on the Srimad Bhagavatam, first and last. Let's offer some prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadhati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Just reading the translation again. Let me now begin speaking on the Bhagavata Purana, which was directly spoken to the great sages by the personality of Godhead, for the benefit of those who are entangled in extreme miseries for the sake of very little pleasure. So as Govinda Mohini Mataji kind of gave a simple recap of what happened in the past. As I was preparing for the class, I just wanted to kind of see where are we going next. What is, because there is a lot that Maitreya Muni and Vidra has spoken. So I was just trying to see what's the next things that are happening. And as I was seeing, Maitreya in the next subsequent verses is actually giving an historical kind of the sequence of parampara through which he has heard the Srimad Bhagavatam, like similar to how Srila Prabhupada has given the entire parampara in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. Maitreya for the next few verses will be speaking on how, as he's saying, like the personality of Godhead has spoken this first to the great sages, and then next he kind of says that long time back, the Kumaras headed by Sanat Kumara, I think so, approached Lord Sankarshan, and then he kind of gives the entire thing. And as I was reading that, one of the questions that I actually got, and also as Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, is if one comes in contact with the book Bhagavatam as well with the devotee Bhagavata, who knows what Bhagavatam is, then such a fortunate man gets out of the material entanglement. So I was thinking, like, there are like here we also see that what Lord Sankarshan spoke to the Chatukumaras is also Srimad Bhagavatam, and we also have the Chatushloki Bhagavatam, and then we also consider the whole Bhagavatam of the 12 cantos and the 18,000 verses also as Srimad Bhagavatam, and also the Bhagavatam which was spoken by Sukadeva Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj, and then by Suta Goswami. So there are like sometimes I remember, I think somebody also asked this question to His Holiness Rompad Maharaj in one of the recent classes, that did, I think it was in context of Maitreya Muni and Vidra, was that or in something else, was that Bhagavatam also 18,000 verses? And Rompad Maharaj said it might or might not be 18,000 verses, but the overall philosophy and the essence is consistent in the Bhagavatam. So sometimes we kind of it's actually happens so much in general, and also to some maybe to also some of us, is we kind of start to question in some of the details, if that's Bhagavatam, is this Bhagavatam? And sometimes I remember when we used to have this Bhagavatam kind of week by week classes that Balram Prabhu used to take in Kishore Kishori, he also kind of raised a point. Sometimes people kind of exclude the first canto from the Srimad Bhagavatam Purana because they say that that's not, because from second canto is the time that Sukadeva Goswami is actually talking to Parikshit Maharaj. So the first canto was kind of added later point of time. So there is a lot of these misconceptions that go on. And then not only on Bhagavatam, if you actually see, I think there are also some questions that are raised on Ramayana Uttarakanda, that Uttarakanda is kind of is added at a later point of time. And sometimes we kind of get into this so much of just thinking on what about kind of get into too much of intellectual thoughts on kind of understanding just the external aspects of some of these things. And also as in the translation, as the Maitreya Muni is saying, that it was directly spoken to the great sages by the personality of Godhead for benefit of those who are entangled in extreme miseries for the sake of very little pleasure. I'm sure like most of us have kind of experience when we are speaking, when we are part of, I remember when we were traveling in a yatra to Vrindavan, and we were trying to distribute some books in the train. And I remember, I think I was in my 11th or 12th grade, and this elderly gentleman comes to me and he asks the question that, did you see the Lord? Like it was straight on my face, and he also asked a question that you people talk that there is no pleasure in this world, but there is a lot of happiness that we gain, and like it kind of and then fortunately, and other devotee who is much more experienced in answering those questions kind of came and helped me. that was also kind of a kind of lesson for me to kind of focus more on reading, but not kind of diverting too much into that. But sometimes when when Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita that dukhalayam ashashvita, many people kind of have this problem kind of taking that sentence that this place is there is pleasure, and it's not that we are not seeing any extreme miseries or anything. And sometimes some devotees have the question, like if you think of who are not kind of not come into contact with the devotional service, sometimes they could have this question as we just discussed of very little pleasure. And sometimes within the devotees there could be a question that as Ishopanishad says about the Purna, the verse where it says whatever the Lord has created is perfect. So sometimes we might have these questions that is material world perfect? And again, the classical question, I'm kind of not going too much into how to answer this, because I'm sure like many of you are much more, like Pratibhav Prabhu, Gopal Hari Prabhu, Devi Murti Mataji, and Lakshmikant Prabhu, all of you are much more qualified in answering all of these questions. But I'm kind of trying to make a point where many a times we kind of get too much entangled in just the intellectual aspects of the bhakti, and not trying to take the essence. And there comes the question, is it good to be intellectual, or is it bad to be intellectual? And when I was trying to kind of, as I was preparing for the class, as I was trying to kind of contemplate on answering that question, I was, first of all, I just wanted to understand what is the actual definition of intellectual as per like the standard Cambridge dictionary that it comes. As per Cambridge dictionary, the definition or the meaning of intellectual means relating to your ability to think and understand things, especially complicated ideas. And I think in this, your ability is the most important. Like for some of us, our ability to kind of be much more deeper into the philosophical and the theological and like just the much deeper, like the complicated idea concepts, is what kind of gives us food. As Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also kind of writes in purport to this verse, to the verse of 3.8.2, he kind of correlates this verse as an answer to the first question that Vidura has asked in the 5th chapter when he first started talking to Maitreya Muni. Like in that verse, Vidura asks, like, please therefore give us direction on how one should live for real happiness. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that this verse, the verse in 8th chapter, which is like almost after 3 chapters, is actually the answer to the first question that Vidura has given. And it kind of shows that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was actually kind of deeply thinking, and he was kind of trying to correlate the various, and many of us who have experience with the purports of Srila Prabhupada and also of previous Acharya, sometimes certain, like whenever Prabhupada is writing, Srila Prabhupada is writing the purports, he many a times quotes Srimad Bhagavatam verses in Bhagavad Gita and then Bhagavad Gita verses in Srimad Bhagavatam. There is certain level of intellect that is kind of is in place where they're able to kind of correlate various places and various quotes from various scriptures and are able to give that. And also Srila Prabhupada write in I think in one of the morning walk or in one of the letters that he has written to Dr. Chaudhary, he says that within Gaudiya Sampradaya, we have these immense literatures that are kind of are in a way started from the contribution from the Goswamis, starting from Goswamis, and then comes like the whole the 3 main personalities, Narottam Das Thakur, who gave lot of this literature, not just in the prose way, but also in the poetry. And then comes Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Baldev Vidyabhushan, and then it goes on. And then Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave both the prose and poetry. And then even till date, we have various personalities within our movement who are kind of contributing to the treasure of literature. So there is definitely certain level of intellect that is within. We see that is there within the devotees. So what is the difference that we see in these intellect people who are able to kind of still able to think and understand, especially the complicated ideas, but are kind of not letting those complicated ideas stop their journey in further in progressing the devotional service. And I remember once Rompad Maharaj, I think in the last visit when he came, one of the devotee was asking a question which he was trying to correlate a pastime of Prahlad Maharaj, and he was asking a question, and Rompad Maharaj first kind of didn't appreciate the correlation that the devotee was making. And then Rompad Maharaj came back and he said that it is actually very important and good to think in an intellectual way about all these aspects that are there in the Bhagavatam, kind of understanding these pastimes not just on an external level, but kind of going deep and then contemplating on them. But there is a compass that is needed when we are kind of going further deep into those things, is kind of making sure that we are always aligned to what acharyas are saying. Like we are kind of so blessed in that way that we have access to so many of the literatures of the acharyas. Some of them are lost, but we are still kind of blessed. Like Srila Prabhupada's purport themselves are his own manifestations of his own ecstasy. And also he has taken points from various of the commentaries of various different acharyas. And not just that, but we also have access to all these commentaries by Jiva Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur on Srimad Bhagavatam, and even in other places. So he says, Rompad Maharaj said in that point that it's so important to kind of also, if that's our ability to kind of, as we were also discussing in one of my previous classes, it is important to think. Like we don't want to be the blind followers where somebody says certain things and we just are nodding our head just because we respect that personality, or that kind of falls within what we appreciate. But it is so important to think and understand, as the dictionary says, especially the complicated ideas. But we always have to make sure that we are following that compass of what the acharyas are kind of within like the scope of what the acharyas are kind of saying. And definitely, as we all know, as we have kind of grown up, and many of us, I mean, I'm sure all of us are parents, and we appreciate our kids kind of asking doubts. And I think it's also one of the parenting kind of idea that the kids who are asking these various questions is an indication of their sign of intelligence. So even for us, like sometimes I remember when I sit in some classes and then I just get amazed by certain questions that devotees kind of ask. And like when the speaker is saying like, are there any questions, I just feel like, oh, I don't have any questions. But when devotees come up with these questions, I feel amazed, and they say like, oh, I think this is something that I also need to hear. And I just feel so grateful for devotees asking those questions. And sometimes I just cannot come up with, I rarely come up with questions in any of the classes, but I feel so happy when devotees come up with these like doubts or questions within the specific topic that the speaker has spoken, or something that they have all kind of, I've already heard. So doubts definitely are a sign of intelligence. But as you have, this was something I remember Swayam Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj was, when he was in his recent trip to Chowpatty, he was talking about this. Somebody asked this, like he was having this kind of town hall within the temple room where one brahmachari and then he were having like Q&A session, and all the devotees could come up with any questions that they had. So one of the devotee asked this question to him, that what do we do with the doubts? Like sometimes we read something like the famous example of Hanuman jumped 100 yojanas from the tip of ocean to Lanka, and many devotees kind of have this doubt that how can he jump? Or sometimes we hear that Chitraketu Maharaj had million wives, and we kind of get puzzled that how can he have like million wives? And not just that, like various aspects of the literatures that we read. So Swayam Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj was answering that in that every doubt needs to be, or any doubt needs to be handled in three ways. He was saying that the first thing, when we get a doubt, is we discuss. The discussion, many times it so happens that we get a doubt. Like I'm sure like we read certain things in Bhagavatam, which happens to most of the times. And the first person that I turn to is, I ask Anand Radha, like, hey, this is what I just read, and I'm not able to kind of think how kind of it it is, and sometimes the correlation kind of doesn't fit in sometimes in our logical head. And many a times the discussion kind of helps me to understand, because she comes from a different perspective, I come from a different perspective, but when we kind of discuss, that definitely helps and kind of clarify the doubt. And then the next thing that he says is, we sometimes have to downplay certain things, certain doubts. It's not always that discussions could help all of our doubts. Sometimes we need to kind of downplay certain doubts. And how do we differentiate between downplaying and discussion? Is, I remember while growing up, when I got to first know some of the unfortunate situations that happened back after Srila Prabhupada left this mortal world, we kind of lost Srila Prabhupada's physical association. Even though I was not personally affected by that, but I kind of had these various doubts that how could that happen, how could this happen, and kind of various things. And I remember once my brother was saying that if that's not something that is so important to your immediate needs of your spiritual life, then you don't have to kind of contemplate too much on those things. And maybe once you grow up, you kind of understand why certain things happen. And now I kind of never discuss those things with most of the devotees. Some things which are very troubling, I did discuss with some devotees, but some things which are kind of just are kind of were something I feel now I was making those reasons as just an excuse, kind of utilizing those doubts as an excuse for fully surrendering to the process. And now when I look back, because he helped me and I was not too much contemplating and on those things, where I was able to downplay those things, I was able to kind of move forward. And then eventually I realized that, oh, that was not needed for me. And that kind of brings us to the third point that Swayam Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj says, is delaying the things. Sometimes you just shut down certain things as downplay means, you just kind of shut it down that this is not needed. And sometimes you just delay the question, like all of us do, where if the kid is asking us to do certain things which we don't want, rather than immediately saying no, we say that, okay, let's do that tomorrow. And many a times by tomorrow they just forget that, or if it's so important, they might come back, and then if you feel that that's important, then you kind of go back. So that's what we also have to do with our doubts. Like, we have to delay those doubts, kind of keep in those boxes of just delay. And then it might so happen that once you move forward, and then when you look back, as it did happen in my case, that was not something that was still doubt for me. I was that kind of, for whatever reason, it kind of got clarified. So this definitely helps us in kind of appreciating, and then as kind of making the compass, as Rompad Maharaj saying, is keeping ourselves aligned in what the Acharyas are saying, and then kind of, as again, the doubts are a sign of intelligence, but it is also a deeper sign of intelligence to kind of clarify and then categorize what is your doubt. Is your doubt in the category of discuss or downplay or delay? Like, if you are kind of not able to think through that, and which again is a sign of deeper intelligence, is not just having doubts, but also having that intelligence to kind of approach somebody and then kind of clarify that, which we see. The famous example that we can think of an intellect person is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. I remember again in the same series that I was saying that Balaram Prabhu, we used to discuss the Bhagavatam. He once said this point about Janma, like the Jnana Karmadi Anavritam, about the words that we hear by Rupa Goswami, where we say that the devotional service should be anavritam. We should avoid jnana and karma. So we're saying that too much absorption in philosophy without focusing on pleasing Krishna is jnana karmadi anavritam. Whereas it's not that even having certain emphasis and focus on philosophy is kind of the Gnana Mishra Bhakti, but that's not what it is. The Gnana Mishra Bhakti is where we are kind of too much absorbed in just understanding the philosophical and theological aspects of the scriptures and just the devotional service, but not focusing on Krishna. And again, if we connect back to what Rompad Maharaj said, is not keeping ourselves aligned in what Acharyas are saying, that becomes the Gnana Karma Dhyanavritam. And as we see in Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's case, that before the experience, before the episode that he happened, that he had with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was an intellectual who was like, he was the most intellectual person across the I think we could say the entire world, where everybody were trying to approach him, trying to understand from him. The king of whole of Orissa was his disciple, and after his experience also, he was still the same personality. Prataprudha Maharaj was still considering him as a spiritual master. He was still kind of an intellectual person who came up with this glorious prayer on Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The intellect was still there. But the difference, as Balram Prabhu said, in just before that experience and after that experience, is that he was able to focus on everything, the intellectual abilities that he had of understanding the philosophy and everything, on pleasing Krishna, but just not an understanding the philosophy as a dry matter. As Srila Prabhupada puts it, like sometimes if you're not focusing on the essence of philosophy, then it just becomes like a dry matter. Then that's what is. So on that note, like, as we have, because I've raised, and we are also kind of ending that time, because I've raised the question of what is Srimad Bhagavatam, and we kind of questions and the doubt. I think it becomes my responsibility to kind of answer that question on what is Srimad Bhagavatam. And because we are all Prabhupada, what better way than to learn what is Srimad Bhagavatam than from Srila Prabhupada himself. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport to 3rd canto, again, I think we'll be there soon, in 3rd canto, 19th chapter, verse 34, Srila Prabhupada writes, Bhagavatam literally means the pastimes of Lord and Lord's devotees. For example, there are pastimes of Lord Krishna and narrations of devotees like Prahlad, Dhruva, and Maharaj Ambarish. Both pastimes pertain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because the devotees' pastimes are in relation with him. The Mahabharata, for example, the history of the Pandavas and their activities is sacred because the Pandavas had a direct relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So as Srila Prabhupada is saying, Srimad Bhagavatam literally means the pastimes of the Lord and Lord's devotees. So in that way, whatever we are trying to, what is Srimad Bhagavatam? Is it just the 12 cantos, or is it some part, as Srila Prabhupada famously said, that even one syllable of Srimad Bhagavatam has the potency to deliver us. So it's not that the entire 12 cantos and 18,000 is Srimad Bhagavatam. Even one, as Srila Prabhupada is writing, is just any pastimes of the Lord or his devotees. Like if you take Leelamrita, that's also very important, because that is about Lord's devotees. Srila Prabhupada himself, his entire journey of how Krishna kind of navigated his life through all the ordeals and then the troubles and then the glories of Srila Prabhupada that he lived through. And from our side, in those times of doubts, I'll end with this point, as Radhika Raman Prabhu says, that we have these various, in our devotional service, we have various pillars which kind of represent the various process of devotional service that we have. And in those times of doubt, sometimes, I think I also presented this point in the past, sometimes, many a times it so happens that certain process of devotional service are our core strength. For some of us, it's just the deity service. For some of us, it's taking care of devotees. For some of us, it's reading scriptures. Or some of us, it's kind of going further into deeper theological aspects of it. And for some of us, it's just interacting with devotees. For some of us, it's chanting holy name. For some of us, we have so many pillars of devotional service, and for each of us, depending on where we are, we kind of take shelter in one pillar or one process of devotional service. And there could be times where we kind of doubts start to creep in, or something troubling is happening, and our core strength, which is the process of devotional service, which you always take shelter, is still not something that I'm not able to kind of correlate. For example, some of us kind of read Srimad Bhagavatam, that's our core strength. And we are going through a passage which we are not able to relate, or we are not able to take to so much of shelter. And in those cases, rather than just letting it go, if we are able to take certain shelter from other process of devotional service, and through that gain strength to understand how you can go back to your original strength. And when we do that, and how can we do that is again, all that we are able to do from our side is put in efforts and show sincerity to the Lord himself. And because we've just went through the Bhadra Purnima, we all understand that Srimad Bhagavatam himself is Lord himself. So all, and as Bhaktitirtha Maharaj famously says, beggars don't have choice. And from our side, what we can expect to receive is depending on how much of the size of the ball that we have. And all we can do basically is in these times of trouble, or when we're trying to read anything in the times of trouble, or when we're kind of having these doubts of understanding, is put in efforts to discuss or downplay or delay, or kind of make efforts to, if our ability is to kind of go deeper into understanding various commentaries, then make those efforts. But understanding that just making that effort will not help us understand those things. And our spiritual knowledge is the descending way of understanding things. All we can do, as Prabhupada himself says, is just put in efforts and pray. And if Krishna believes, if Krishna feels that whenever it's time to reveal it to us, once Krishna reveals it to us, then that's when we kind of can understand, oh, okay, so this is what it means. And sometimes it, as we feel like it's just an epiphany that happens, you're just sometimes taking a shower and sometimes it just clicks. It's the revelation that Krishna does, and based on the prayers and the efforts that you're able to put in, then Krishna says, and as Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport to the verse again, what we kind of correlated this to the verse of the Dukhalaya Mashashvatam. Srila Prabhupada writes in that purport that Mahatmas receive transcendental message from the realized devotees and thus gradually develop devotional service in Krishna consciousness. So wherever we are, whatever stage of devotional service we are, whether we are kind of cruising through the devotional service, or whether we are limping through the devotional service, or whether we feel we are stuck because of whatever reason, all we can basically do is make sure that put in those efforts to make our balls much bigger and bigger through our absorption into the Krishna Katha. And as Srila Prabhupada is writing, once we are able to, when we hear from these transcendental messages from the realized devotees, then thus we can gradually develop our devotional service. Again, the devotional service in Krishna consciousness. It's again, Srila Prabhupada kind of make sure that there is no confusion or any deviation that could possibly happen. So he kind of is very emphatic in his statements, like gradually develop devotional service in Krishna consciousness. So I kind of, I'm sorry, I went 4 minutes over the time. And I hope and pray that may we all be in situations where our balls become bigger and bigger, and we continue to hear. This is again a great platform, as thanks to Lakshmikant Prabhu and all of you. We have this opportunity to kind of hear Krishna Katha every day in the morning. And again, Swayam Bhagavan Krishna Maharaj, Swayam Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj says in that talk that when we start our day with these kind of equipping ourselves with Krishna Katha and then chanting and then all these discussions that we are able to have, when the day hits at 9 a.m., then you are fully prepared. So may we all be kind of be in these situations over and over again, so that our balls can be much bigger and we always be surrounded by Mahatmas like all of you, so we can hear more and more of Krishna Katha and always be engaged in devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Thank you so much. If there was something that I misspoke, or if there are any comments or corrections or questions, I'm happy to take.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dhanvat Pranam, Jai Shri Prabhupada. Thank you for a very wonderful class. Just a quick a reflection and then a question.
Yes, Prabhu.
It's amazing how in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the philosophy, it's giving us the descriptions of the Lord's pastimes, the philosophy, and part of the Srimad Bhagavatam is glorification of the Bhagavatam itself.
Yeah.
Like from time to time, every few chapters, we find these verses that glorify the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that is the Bhagavatam also.
Yeah.
And it's so important because time to time we actually forget
Mm-hmm.
the importance of engaging in this most potent spiritual practice. And we also forget, also while reading, we start to sometimes feel, well, maybe it's not so important, or we may lose some inspiration. So it kind of, pokes us and reminds us. So it's so important. And this verse, this purport especially, was so nice, where Prabhupada is saying that and the verse is saying that a person who has this opportunity to hear Srimad Bhagavatam in the association of advanced devotees is so fortunate. They're so fortunate.
Yeah.
And this great fortune is ours, and this great fortune we can share with others. We can make others that fortunate also. And I was wondering, in the last sentence, where Maitreya Muni, it says that Maitreya Muni therefore decided to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam first and last. And I think you answered the question, but what exactly does he mean by first and last? In the middle, is he speaking something else? So I think maybe you answered it, but I fully didn't get it. So maybe just succinctly in a few sentences, you can maybe share your realization. What do you think that means?
Sure, Prabhu. When I was reading through the purport, how I understood that was that for all the questions that Vidra was asking, all the answers that Maitreya Muni was about to speak is contained within Srimad Bhagavatam itself. It's not that he spoke first Srimad Bhagavatam and the last Srimad Bhagavatam, but in middle he was speaking something else. Like everything that he was about to speak, based on the questions that Vidra was asking, is Srimad Bhagavatam. It kind of contains everything. As I think somewhere Srila Prabhupada also writes that in the first line it says traditionally comes down in the disciplic succession for the solution of all the problems of human society. Mm-hmm. So irrespective of whatever your question or Vidra's question was, is just answering everything within the kind of bracket of Srimad Bhagavatam. That's how I understood it.
That makes sense, Prabhu. Thank you. Perfect answer. Yeah. So he's saying that everything, first and there wasn't any need to start anything else. Yeah. Just Bhagavatam. He spoke. Interesting. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. And thank you for being there.
No, thank you. Oh, actually, your class is very nice. We're fortunate to hear your class and your realizations.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other?
Thank you so much, Prabhu. It was nice class actually, as Gopal Haridhvani said. Especially when we get those kind of doubts which are beyond our fitting within our mind, right, our brain. So it's very difficult to get those doubts. So I think you quoted the Maharaj how to handle those. But generally, many times it happens. We ask these clarifications or questions, right? So not to, please the Lord, of course, many times, of course, we need to understand those things of course, actually, they help us also to move forward in our journey. We may not realize, but yeah, a lot of times our faith gets stronger when we hear the explanations from a devotees. I think one I remember, it got stuck to me very well. Gopal Hari Prabhu, I think one of the classes he was talking about so how the sound, right? When we are here, we are able to talk to somebody in the other side of the planet, right? Just by using the telephone. If I say this, maybe say 30, 40 years to somebody, people would not even believe it. Right? Yeah, no, how is it possible that somebody can do that, right? You can talk from the person on the other side of the earth. So, but yeah, some of the things which may not be able to realize within our current understanding of how we grow up, right? It may be difficult to understand. Yeah, so I just remember that. So, so when we ask those kind of questions and get those clarifications from the devotees, it really helps us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. It was nice.
I remember once in Tirupati, I believe, one I don't remember the Maharaj's name. He was saying that sometimes some devotees used to come and ask Srila Prabhupada that why is Krishna having a buffalo horn? Why is he not having a cow horn? And Prabhupada tried answering the questions, and like that person was kind of on it. Like if Krishna loves cows, then he should have cow horn. Why is a buffalo horn? And eventually Prabhupada said, like, once you go to spiritual world, just go and ask Krishna. So it's sometimes we kind of are so adamant on just kind of getting it, like we kind of don't make it effort to kind of move forward with. So sometimes where we are, we just can't understand unless we kind of live through certain experiences. So it's
Yes, Prabhu. No, how is this? I mean, Ramayana things, right? Generally, that bridge with those things is really mind-boggling. Sometimes even how the planet was situated, those, I mean, many millions of years ago, we don't know, right? How the countries are, how far each other, because of a lot of things happened. I mean, what do you call that effect? That I mean, the 7 continents got formed and all, right? They were all kind of one land parcel earlier, right? So how they become divided into multiple pieces and all. So it's all difficult to understand.
yeah, but it's good to make efforts.
Yes.
First of all,
Yeah.
the first step should always be discussion with devotees making efforts, and
Yeah.
then if that's not something that's happening, if even after discussion devotees are suggesting that maybe this is not something that's so important, then you kind of think through and then make a choice rather than just
So I was asking once Sri Kishore Prabhu, I think, how all these people, right? I mean, the bad people in this, bad people so called, they will get the names as like Duryodhana, Dushashana, right? Who will name their children like that? Right? So,
yeah,
I mean, it's like a bad meaning comes. So he was giving very nice explanation. So thank you. And yeah, I think when we ask some questions and we'll get some clarification for sure. So most of the times we may get right answers.
yeah.
That will help us. Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions, then we can.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyo vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Hare Krishna.